I'm a big fan of The Ethical Skeptic, and he made a post here today that I've been thinking about it for a while. So I'll let's read it first, and then I'll comment a bit. He says, "Life is deliberately constrained because unconstrained beings cannot generate authentic moral knowledge. Don't sell me God knowledge. God knowledge nullifies moral risk. Ethics, therefore, only cultivate where ignorance and suffering exist." Now, the ethical skeptic is not a believer. He is, I think, either a agnostic or an atheist. I'm not quite sure which one of those. And I want to be cautious not to try to put words in his mouth. So I'm going to take this comment in a direction which I don't think is what he intended. And I don't mean to have him feel like I'm usurping his post here, if you will. So I acknowledge up front that the direction I'm taking this is probably not what he had in mind. But this does make me think in some ways about the advent of Messiah coming to earth. And that if the point here is that being unconstrained, if being omnipotent, having no, maybe I'll use the word no repercussions for your choices, if you will, is not an environment where you can learn or really apply anything moral. He calls out here the significance of ignorance and suffering, and let's take those one at a time. Ignorance means there will be cases when doing the right thing may or may not have a payback. There's something which you believe you should do. You are uncertain about whether or not doing the quote-unquote right thing will actually have a payoff. Maybe you get rewarded for returning someone's lost property. Maybe you don't. There's ambiguity there. Suffering in this context, I think, should be taken to mean that you can't simply dictate what you think ought to be. You can't simply choose what you think the right behavior ought to choose and not face any pain on result of making the right choice. You have to recognize that doing the thing you think you should do may cost you pain, potentially even great pain. So nothing about it is abstract. Nothing about it makes the decision easy. The decision oftentimes will not be clear-cut or easy. This recognition of the necessity of ignorance and suffering, or maybe call it uncertainty in suffering, made me reconsider the profundity of what Paul describes in the advent of Christ coming to earth, in the advent of Messiah coming to earth, and makes me wonder if the fact that he had to experience that same suffering, and you could perhaps even say, in some sense, that same uncertainty, the sense of, is what I'm doing going to pay off? When he was on the cross and said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Was there an element of genuine confusion there, of genuine ignorance, of wondering why the story went the way it did? But perhaps in some cosmic level, on some very deep level, if you will, that ignorance and that suffering had to be there in order for God to be able to give a true moral compass, for him to be the lawgiver, that he can't simply give the law from a place of infinite power in pure abstraction, but instead he gives it from a place of weakness, if you will, if I'm allowed to say that it's from a place of weakness and vulnerability that he's able to generate the moral compass that's reflected in the laws that he gives us and in his instructions that he gives to us. And again, I know this is not the direction that he intended the post, but it did make me reconsider the profundity of the advent of Christ in the way that Paul describes it.